One of the things that I love about HR at an organization that's smaller or medium sized, not only do I have to deliver that report myself, but I have to learn how to create it. I have to actually learn the math behind it or the formulas and things like that. And not only know how to read the report, I know like how to understand that data and I understand the story that it's telling me a lot of the times in a way that some HR leaders at much larger organizations really don't.
Hello, and welcome to the Future Proof HR podcast, where we explore the cutting edge trends shaping the future of human resources, people operations, and overall the way we work. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjappu, founder and CEO at Cleary. Today, I'm excited to welcome in Michael Salamey, an HR leader with a strong background in technology, employee engagement, and workforce analytics. Michael spent his career at the intersection of HR and innovation, navigating the complexities of technology adoption, most recently, of course, AI, and with a heavy focus on talent acquisition challenges, and has a lot to say of the evolving roles of HR in small to mid-sized companies. Without further ado, Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. Good to be here.
So excited to have you here, and we wanted to talk a little bit about, this unique moment of being in HR at a small company. How do we want to define that? I think you've worked at different organizations, right? But for me, it's really just about the unique challenges of being in an HR org of literally the whole team is 3 to 5 people or less, and you're covering all of it. How do you think about it?
Yeah, I think there's lots of ways to think about it. Of course, you could go by headcount for the organization. Currently, I'm working for a company that's got about 120 employees and about 80 contractors. Of course, you can go by revenue, you could go by any number of characteristics. But yeah, generally speaking, I'm just thinking about small HR teams. And I've certainly worked for organizations that have had much larger teams and headcount as well. But yeah, I really enjoy being at that small to mid-sized business right now. It's worked well for me for the last decade. So no
So,
complaints.
so besides those definitions, I also want to get into the feelings or the mindset, right? Of if you're going to be like working in this kind of organization. Imagine you're talking to someone who is work exclusively at large HR teams, has some experience, but is considering going into a small HR team. What are the things that they should be prepared for?
Yeah, they should be prepared to have a lot fewer resources. So HR at a smaller company is much more hands-on. You're not managing through dashboards and even to some degree, you're not managing through delegation. You have to do a lot of the work. You have to build a lot of the reports. And that's one of the things that I love about HR at an organization that's smaller or medium sized. At larger organizations, I had robust technology that could deliver any kind of report I want when I want it. But at these smaller companies, not only do I have to deliver that report myself, but I have to learn how to create it. I have to actually learn the math behind it or the formulas and things like that. So it makes me much more robust, in my opinion, as an HR leader, because I not only know how to read the report, I know like how to understand that data and I understand the story that it's telling me a lot of the times in a way that some HR leaders at much larger organizations really don't. And when I've seen them transition to smaller companies, they struggle mightily because they don't have the automations that they're used to.
Okay, technology richness, or we'll
Yeah.
come back to that topic.
There you go.
But that's definitely a theme we want to get into. But I think maybe one thing to talk about is a little bit about how roles collapse. Is actually the other way. As companies grow, the roles split up and expand, right?
Generalist versus specialist.
Right. So, in your experience, and it doesn't have to be just about your current kind of company, but in the small HR teams of from 1 to 5, who are these people? What do they tend to be? And what are the set of things that they're doing, which to your point is going to be a little bit greater, right? A little bit higher remit than when it's a bigger company. What does a typical team look like?
Sure. So depending on the company, the industry, it can look at a number of different ways. But often what it looks like is that small HR team is the company's de facto first line of legal defense. They're compliance officers. They are their benefits specialists. They're sometimes the payroll clerks. Sometimes they are the work organizational psychologists and counselors for the organization. They can be a little bit of everything. They're the recruiters. They're the marketing team in some way. And they all can wear many hats. So my HR manager is not only doing record keeping, compliance, and lots of day to day activities. She's also leading recruiting efforts, building job position descriptions, job postings, the whole thing. And we were running compliance across 30 states. So it's not just knowing one state's laws, it's understanding them across multiple states and sites and understanding how to navigate all of that. While at the same time, addressing employee concerns and making sure that we're not breaking any laws. It's not easy.
So even at a team of 3 to 5, is it a series of HR managers and HR generalists, HR assistants, and you quarter to quarter balancing, rebalancing from everything from talent attraction, the recruiting process, onboarding, compliance, all the different things that you mentioned. It just gets split out. So there's like almost no specialization, you would say?
There's some specialization that each person will more or less find their niche, particularly if HR is in charge of, let's say, training. Some of your specialists or some of your generalists rather will become training specialists because it's their jam. And somebody you're going to find is very into employee engagement and will lean that way and handle all of the employee experience things. And usually your chief people officer, CHRO at that level is going to be doing the heavy lifting as far as compliance and overall company strategy, making sure that HR and from a mission standpoint is aligned with the company's goals and objectives and that we're moving the strategy of the organization forward, as well as balancing the missions, goals, and objectives of the rest of the executive leadership team. It can look any number of ways, but yes, everybody's a generalist.
Yeah, I guess it's exaggerating it a bit to say that everyone does everything, but it's almost to that degree. So,
Pretty close.
okay, so this is a great baseline to establish. I would think that most folks, if you've had any experience in HR, none of this feels new or so different, right? But all that said, let's come to this current moment, right? In 2025, where we have a lot of pressure on HR teams in terms of doing more with less. And for a small HR team, how does that manifest? What are you seeing out there like in the industry? And then also, how do you respond to that?
Yeah. So realistically, I mean, that pretty much summed it up. The answers in the question, I think it's just doing more with less. What I typically find, like this is the golden age of AI, right? So HR's, particularly if I'm in one of three career paths right now, I'd be a little bit worried. One of them is HR, another one is legal, and the third is finance or accounting. This is the first time in recent history that technology has come not for blue collar workers, but for white collar workers. So imagine in a time like today where AI can actually know all of the laws across all of the states and municipalities and can easily translate not only those laws from legal jargon into colloquial speech, but it can also help me translate that to relaying that to the employee group. Whereas before it might have been a lot harder trying to figure out what the labor lawyer was saying and turning that into real talk for our team members. So doing more with less is very challenging, especially with the kinds of tool sets we have. So when you're bringing in heavy lifting tools like that, you not only have to figure out how to integrate those with the limited time, resources, and expertise that you have, but also how to continue just doing your daily day-to-day functions. How are you handling your FMLA requests? How are you handling PTO in the organization? How are you paying for travel? Just all of the normal HR day-to-day stuff is blended in there. So it can become overwhelming. And what it comes down to is allocation of time more than anything. Just where do you want to devote your energy today? You there are a million tasks to accomplish, but you can only accomplish five today. Which five are they going to be?
Right. Yeah, that's a serious strain, right, on the organization, on the HR organization specifically. It's interesting you bring up legal and finance. The commonality is, I think, is it's all in G&A spend, right? It's all like
Mhm.
below the line, and it's all within the realm of what you want to make as efficient as possible. So I guess before we talk about really like where the future is and like where it's all headed, if we stay in this current moment of being practical, because I think there's so many teams I think like this that can relate to this, where there's a few of you, there's just not from the leads or the CHRO's perspective budget for anything like relief in the form of new headcount within the
Mhm.
HR team. How do you think about spending enough time on investing in your processes or automation or just efficiencies while also ensuring that you're just being responsive and taking care of what needs to be done. You had several examples of that, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think it always comes down to one of the three buckets I just mentioned: time, resources, expertise. Time is an interesting one because most of the time that you're struggling with is not, I guess, periodicity, it's allocation. It's where are you going to focus that time? And you only have so many buckets that you can focus it into. That's part of it. And then there's also time for things like automation is great, but you need time to figure out what platform you're going to use, who's going to implement that, what does the integration look like? Are you going to manage that with your IT team? What's the budget? Now you're getting into resources. Where is that money going to come from? Are you going to have to cut somewhere else? You've got so many things that have to be done. There's usually three buckets of money in the organization, right? There's like, overhead, utilities, and keeping the lights on. There's salaries, and then there's the actual cost of doing the business, right? And sure, everybody wants to make $1 million an hour. Some companies can even do that. The question is, well, what bucket do you want to take from? Do you want to not have any overhead? In which case you don't get that nice laptop that you like working on, and you have no access to AI tools or any other tools, but you're making a very good salary, a very good hourly rate. Good for you. You're going to hate your life, but you'll get paid well. Or do you want to take that bucket from that money from somewhere else? Do we not want good training? Do we want to be non-compliant in some areas? So you always have to choose which resources you're going to devote where. And then that final piece is just the expertise. When you're a smaller company, you don't always have your resident SME or subject matter expert that can learn about every new thing, every new technology, especially in the current time with AI coming on board. There's breaking news like almost by the hour, probably within the time that we started discussing that something new has been announced. There's a new AI model out there. It's where do you build in that time and where do you focus those resources and how do you gain the expertise while keeping the machinery going at the same time? It's almost like the caricature of somebody riding a unicycle and playing the cymbals and beating a drum and blowing a horn all at the same time, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. That's quite an image. So that's the modern small HR team, right? So then that's an interesting point about how there's a mix of work that you need to allocate your time across, but it really is about the strategically, and you're even getting at the company level, right? Like, how do you want to spend your resources? And what are you saying yes to, and what are you saying no to? Which also goes into how do you want to invest in your people, right? Is it this quarter we want to make sure we hire this many people no matter what because I don't know funding is dependent on it on hiring these
Mhm.
people or securing some contracts and we've committed to implementing these things and or we're trying to go into a new geo or we're trying to just make sure that like people don't rage quit after negative interactions with HR whatever the thing is to be very clear about what that particular thing is and actually going to your image I wonder if people on these small teams, they truly have believe they have the agency in deciding what they need to do. Instead of juggling that thing, just what if you stop juggling it? What if you get off the unicycle and you just start walking? Yeah, there is no L&D program because we don't do that. Or there's no payroll team, we are just doing PEO. But you have to make like choices of saying no to things very explicitly as well. But I think one thing I think as what I'm hearing is like a thing that teams implicitly say no to all the time is evaluating new technology, right? Because like you mentioned that it's like one because it's
Mhm.
changing so fast, especially in the world of AI, but also maybe there's an expertise gap about just understanding what's going on, how to evaluate it, and it's not even just about like time. But is that true that what you're saying is that implicitly that is an area that a lot of small HR teams are just saying no to because lack of expertise or time? And if so, is that right? Are there other things that they're juggling that actually should be deprioritized in favor of trying to get with the times or trying to find efficiencies more proactively?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because I think it's different for each organization. But yeah, they do have to figure out where the key boulders are that they want to move and when. You have competitors out there. They may be getting ahead of you. This is something we wrestle with ourselves. Not only should we embrace AI, but can we and how can we? And what I mean by that is like for us at ID Plans, we're working in commercial real estate and our clients are property owners for commercial property. So their clients are the tenants, which may be Best Buy, Target, Walmart, whoever. You better believe that Best Buy, Target, and other big companies are very concerned about what happens with their data and how it's being used and where that's going. So our clients, the property owners, are also very concerned about whether we're using AI and how, and we have to remain SOC 2 compliant and we have to protect the II and all of those things. We're limited right off the bat. And then beyond that, it's who do we want to hitch our post to, because there are so many options right there out there right now. Every week there's a new leader. Is it Perplexity? Is it OpenAI? Is it Google Gemini? Where do you go? Is Microsoft Copilot? Which one do you choose when you're waiting to see who's going to come out ahead? And at the same time, you're trying to outthink your competitors. Who are they looking at it? How are they using that? How far are they getting at? Or how much are they gaining on us? So it's a very tricky balance and there's no easy answer, unfortunately. I think every company has to look at all the variables. And right now, it's just making the best decision you can make. Sometimes it's rolling the dice a bit, but that's where we are.
Yeah, so far, like from your personal perspective, like for workflows at work, but or for your team across like the recruiting to AI, HR kind of spectrum, do you have any particular successful adoptions or workflows with either new tools or just AI in general?
Sure. Yeah, we experiment with it all the time. We're a tech company, software driven and tech oriented. Most recently, at least the most recent example that comes to mind is we took annual employee survey data and we uploaded that because it's anonymized. No worries about using client data or anything or PII or anything like that. But we loaded the anonymized employee satisfaction survey data into Google's Notebook LM and they create a podcast summarizing that data. It's a little bit weird. It's a little bit novel and it's a little bit cartoonish, but man, is it just the most interesting thing. It summarized 3 years of data in 7 minutes and 42 seconds or something like that. It was a really good synopsis. It wasn't bad at all. And it took about 5 minutes for it to do that. And the time it took me to drag those files into Notebook LM and then hit the produce podcast button. That's just one example of some of the ways that we incorporate it because a lot of what we do is built around site data and property mapping. So we do virtual tours and now we're looking at metaverse style stuff of where we're doing augmented reality type of things, or at least we're experimenting with it and looking at how can we keep that data simplified and yet robust in an elegant way that is intuitive for people who aren't tech savvy or these property managers maybe have never read a blueprint, but they need to understand that same information in a very digestible way. So we're always playing with technology and trying to figure out what's the best way to deliver that information.
So that podcast example, would that be something that you would publish to the organization? Could you imagine doing something like that?
We did. Yeah, we shared
Okay,
it
there
with
you
the
go. Okay.
yeah, we shared it with the organization. To be honest, mixed results. Some people thought it was a little bit too uncanny valley. Some people thought it was very clever. Some people just couldn't believe that these were not real people doing this. They sound like we hired actors. And sometimes the podcast itself is a little bit cheesy. So you could understand that there's something off, but you're not sure what. It's not quite there yet, but it was very compelling. It was just a fun thing to do. Yeah, mixed results. Can't say it was a home run.
Fair. So these things will always improve if you're talking about the actual end product of if the goal is to make it feel like it was like real, like the
Yeah.
conversation. Everyone out there, I sure we're real people having a real conversation. This is the gold standard. Doesn't get better than this, I assure you. But that's one observation. But to me, what's truly interesting is you started with something of a curiosity, right? Something that it would be nice if I could do this. And I think without this technology, many of us would have stopped there, right? Because if I wanted to really create a report around 3 years worth of sentiment analysis, it might be like, I don't know, a serious push or fight, or at least comments at the board level that's saying, we need to turn this freaking thing around. There's been a couple of quarters that we've been talking about this, but I don't want to hear about losing more talent without doing a full on thorough analysis of what is going on with our engagement. And how does that compare to the market, and like a real strategic initiative with an objective, which would force you to put a couple of people behind it over several weeks to make something happen. Fully analyze
Absolutely.
this data. We're gonna have to have multiple meetings internally to get to some insight analysis, and that just wasn't your starting point, right? So there are enough
Well,
things like that where your team's time gets pushed at that. But what this does is maybe open up some of those things, those workflows or those ideas where you wouldn't necessarily resource months of labor against it. But maybe there's some insight, maybe there's something that can come out of it if you're thinking about that bucket of things that are just below what actually gets done quarter to quarter, right? But you really wish you could. And sometimes some of those things, if done properly, you might actually have more value than some of the things that you did prioritize, right? You just don't know. But like the
right.
surface area of like luck almost, right? Of better outcomes, you get kind of increase. So that was like just one thought I had, the way you were approaching it with curiosity, even if it wasn't a burning kind of priority.
Yeah. What's interesting though is we also did all the other stuff as well. So we did go deep on the insights. We did have meetings around it. The podcast was at the end. It was strictly curiosity. Like I heard about this thing and I thought, what an interesting idea. Let's see what it does. And we did it. And we thought that's pretty good. Why don't we just send it out and we'll send it with the report and continue the strategy sessions behind all of that data as well. So yeah, we had fun with that thing. And we also did it the old fashioned way also. What's interesting, Thomas, is you were talking about how this is like the edge of something new and it'll get better as it iterates over time. And what's really fascinating about that to me is I'm beginning to wonder if our world is just going to be this forever kind of edge of technology space where things are almost good, are almost great.
Mhm.
And I think back to like maybe 2010, looking at Word 2010, it was almost great. And even today, Microsoft Word's almost great because it's always at the edge of what it can do because we're always pushing technology forward. That the podcasting, it's cool. Will it ever be like a regular podcast? Maybe, but then a real podcast will have already iterated and done something new and it'll just keep chasing its tail and it will just always be almost great. And I wonder if there's a threshold somewhere in the future where things become truly great and consistently and predictably so instead of just almost great. Even AI, for all of the power of LLMs right now, they still hallucinate. We haven't solved that. And you still have to double check their work. And my self-driving car, it's almost great, but it's not quite there. I still have to watch the road. I still have to take control over that. It still tries to steer me off into a ramp sometimes where it shouldn't. It's almost great. Everything's almost great. And that's just this perpetual state that we seem to live in right now. I just think that's it's really interesting. I wonder how long it will be this way, if not forever.
Right. Yeah, because you have a different standard if you have something that you're doing out of curiosity or as a novelty versus trying to replace something that's core or important, which I think gets to the core of what you're talking about. Any new technology, you end up getting adoption with new workflows or low risk workflows, right? So making sure a car doesn't crash is a societal like issue, and there's actually jurisdictions and legislation that actually is a big impact on actually the implementation of the technology versus the
Mhm.
technology itself. There are those who would argue that in self-driving car technology, it's already better, already, and for years better than humans. But
For sure.
it's actually about the very human laws and our society's approach to it and the feeling of risk, right? That actually is mitigating application more broadly spread. And the same way, right? So if there was like a clear board level need for a deep dive into employee engagement at the organization over the last 3 years, we're not at the point where we'll say, let's put that out to an LLM to suck a bunch of data and automatically
Mhm.
produce a report to them. But I think where we're at is that action could reduce the effort, the total number of hours spent in getting to the same quality outcome, right? It needs the
Mhm.
oversight, but if it's done efficiently, then there's that opportunity. But then it goes back a little bit to these very human problems, which is which technology, when do I have time to do it? How do I learn it? Which is always like changing in full motion, right? But
Yeah.
that's a great example. And I love that concept of living on the edge almost, right? With sometimes you feel like products were better 50 years ago in some
Right.
kind of way. But with software and certainly AI, everything's probabilistic. Hallucinations and 100% certainty 100% of the time is just not possible. But one thing, and this is a sneaky suspicion I have, but on the recruiting side, my sense is there's been a lot more, I don't know, application integration of AI technology into just what is it that a recruiting team or a recruiter does versus like on the post employee hire life cycle side. You and are up to date on things on both sides. What's your thought? Is there a difference in how people tend to see it and also in just penetration of technology on the recruiting versus post hire side?
Yeah, I have strong feelings about this one. I feel like job searching right now just has to suck. It's the worst. When I talk to people, my HR peers, but also people who ask me for advice on looking for work, commonly get, I've got this experience and this certification. I've got a degree from this great school and I can't even get an interview. Like, what am I doing wrong? And I constantly say, you're not doing anything wrong. It's not you. There are so many factors here compared to 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when previously, when you would go look for a job, for example, you were competing against the 500 or so people in your zip code that also walked to that store, saw the job ad on the door, and walked in and filled out an application. Now you're competing against 400,000 people who applied over Indeed all across the US, sometimes from other countries as well. And, that just being seen is an anomaly. It's like hitting the lottery by itself. And then not only that, but the application tracking system that's reading your resume has been set up to only look for the certain keywords. And so now you're in this race to figure out what's the magic words that are going to get me in front of a human being. And then what are the magic words that will get that person to grant me an interview so that I can show them, hey, I'm actually a decent candidate and I know what I'm doing. Just give me a shot. And it's really tricky. And there's so many complications on both sides. There's biases, there's misunderstandings of how the systems work. There's every resume writing service, which is something I rail against. If you're a decent writer, if you're a terrible writer, sure, hire a resume writing service. You could probably use it. If you're a decent writer already, you've seen good resumes and you're emulating that to a certain degree, you're probably fine. It's not the resume. It's not going to do you any good because every application that you're sending off is looking at different keywords for that resume and you don't know what they are. And so my worry is that now we have AI that's it's incentivizing, oh, maybe too strong of a word, but it's incentivizing lying, right? Like the resume writing service is lying about your skills as a writer and communicator. Then the AI is lying about your actual job responsibilities and qualities. Like, am I a revenue optimization through employee activation professional, or do I work in HR? It's just become this morass of garbage in, garbage out. And from every standard, and I have also learned that there's these new services where the AI will actually apply for you going through Indeed and LinkedIn. So now you've got a worker or an applicant rather, who's using AI to fight AI. And yeah, it's just become insane. And maybe there's something better on the other side. Like I do believe that the automation and the AI tools will ultimately lead to better applicant selection, but we are not there yet. And from my perspective, we're a long way off still. It's just a terrible experience. And I really hate it all right now, but
So,
it's what we have.
so if I were to put it chronologically, right? So like step one
Mhm.
is like the ATSs and the technologies are putting in on the employer side these AI into the screening part of the process, right? Which has always been there with OCR. I feel like for decades and like
Mhm.
resume like reviews, but it's just like much more entrenched. So the
Mhm.
bar to talk to a human, even a recruiter, is very much decided by like AI. Step two, savvy job seekers find tools and I guess entrepreneurs who see this whole of the market for job seekers to fight this like AI by helping them maybe produce 1,000 versions of their resumes for 1,000 different
Yeah.
applications, or if not, yeah, that's where it's headed to kind of fight it back. And then ultimately, what the recruiter or the first human on the employer side is reviewing, the quality is no different than where we were before as we get through the same phase. So then, does that all mean that more so than before, the way you actually get that interview is through a personal human connection through the your extended network, if you're experienced
Hmm.
ideally, or I don't know, your professor or whatever, if you're like coming first into the market and kind of everyone just mutually decides there's a armistice here, it's useless, and we're gonna go completely back to the qualitative and I guess relationship based ways of which has its own issues, right? Of matching
Yeah.
people for roles.
Yeah. I think there's two paths forward from where we are right now. The first path is definitely networking, and that's the most common path. Unfortunately, that's not a great path for people who may be introverts, but extraordinarily talented, or people that just don't network well in group settings versus one-on-one conversations, or people that don't like the artifice of a networking conversation where you're talking high level stuff about stuff that neither of you actually care about, rather than going into one topic that's very deep and meaningful. Is skills based hiring, which is where I think the technology is heading. So now we're putting people through actual testing of skills, and that's a mess too for a couple of reasons. Number one, the hiring manager has to know what skills they actually need, and often they don't. And then secondly, the creator of the skills based assessment has to understand how to create a good skills based test. And there are a lot of vendors out there who are not using organizational psychologists or industry best practices. They're just creating tests that they think are good tests. There's some of that out there as well. And then, what exacerbates that is, of course, now you've got this situation where you've got this AI fighting AI on the one hand, and then on the other hand, when somebody can do a skills based test, they're being inundated with tests the same way we are with surveys. Every time you go to a website, hey, do you got a few seconds to answer a couple of questions? Now it's the same thing, but for hiring. Like every time you apply to a job, you have to complete 3 to 5 tests. They'll only take 15 to 45 minutes, but multiply that by how many jobs you've applied for today. Now you have a full-time job applying for jobs that will, again, likely never even talk to you. So,
Yeah.
it's just a big mess. Yeah. Unfortunately, those are the two most common paths that I see for it, and neither of them look good.
So network
Yeah.
or skills based assessment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which credentialing is regardless of what you think of what a college education or any kind of master's
Yeah.
degree or whatever it does, it provides a signal that, oh, this person was dedicated enough to get into this university or graduate from this program. Okay, so it's worth a chat with a human. But instead of that, arguably, it's now getting into skills. There's some functions like arguably sales and engineering, maybe customer service, where there are explicit metrics associated with what you're doing, which can get
Right.
you make it easier for skills based assessments and still not a home run. Maybe you're able to get closer without actually doing a test, but based on specific experience that you're able to then equate to this particular role. But for a lot of roles, it's a little bit harder to do. So the skills based assessment is interesting because it forces you, if you're able to do that well, forget the candidate experience, which you're saying it can be a nightmare. I can definitely see that
Mhm.
these days. But from the employer side, if you actually do that, that means that, and the manager knows exactly what you're looking for, right? Because if theoretically, if you have an interview, not even just an interview process that has like the competencies and the questions that we're going to ask about it, what we consider to be a good answer versus a bad answer, and also what kind of things they have done as accomplished, as demonstrated by X. If you really have all that together, that is a sign of a better functioning organization internally in terms of what you want and need,
Sure.
regardless of technology. But then, yeah, the candidate experience just seems to be getting worse these days. And is it just about the employer employee power dynamics with the market at the moment? And when companies are realizing we just can't get the talent, we need it faster. That's when you eliminate the things, you get the human in, the recruiter or the manager in talking to people faster, or that happens like naturally. Is that just more so than technology? Is it just a signal of where the market is? So depending on the particular function, or is it really driven by the technology, you think, at this moment?
I think there's different pressures and being applied in different ways and in different forms. So, absolutely, there's the competitive pressure of how do I get people in here faster and get them trained faster and get them to competency faster so that we
Right.
can continue to move faster and iterate faster and so forth. And then I think there's also pressure from the standpoint of, I guess I'll just say, competence of the hiring manager as well as the recruiter often. So often what I see is sometimes people will send me a requisition. I need this job and this is what I'm looking for. And I look at the position description. I say, this is actually not a position description. This is a list of complaints about the last person who was here. Why don't we take a look at the job to figure out what skills we actually need to be successful here instead of what skills the last person didn't have. So
That's a
mm,
great insight because that's now something that's a manager who's like sitting down to reflect and okay, I'm being serious about what I want to get this right, but then channeling that in not the most efficient way. That's a
uh,
good check. And yeah, that's a good point. And it's also the other fact is that it's not about the last person, but also maybe the job has changed. Maybe it's a time to open up and think about the requirements and even the function or the level being like different and being explicit about that would also help. But that's a great psychological insight about what happens in practice a lot. I love that.
but yeah, it's very similar to the way we approach relationships, right? You have a bad relationship, you think, I'm never going to do that again. So I'll find this other person who's the exact opposite and end up repeating this cycle. But yeah, so I think there's some of that. And then I also think that recruiters have pressure on them because they're expected to be like experts in every single job there is. Right? So a recruiter often is somebody who's either mid-career or early career, and they're vetting your next C-suite person. They don't have the knowledge or expertise to know a good one from a bad one. I've often heard from my HR peers who are out looking for work. I give an actual personal example of the last job that I actually held. One of their job requirements was a SHRM SCP certification, which I had, which is great. Got the job. And I find myself one day putting together employee swag boxes in my garage for 6 hours. And I recruited my wife to help me with this. And I'm just thinking, what on earth am I doing? And I actually requested
Yeah,
a meeting
you
with
can't do that. Does she have a SHRM license? She can't.
yeah,
Can't her in.
that's right. That's right. So I actually requested a meeting with the CEO and COO, and I had a conversation with them. And through that conversation, I realized something. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, gentlemen, do either of you know what a SHRM SCP is or does? And they both had to say, no, actually, we don't. I said, then why was that in the ad? Because you definitely don't need that. And what you want is an HR assistant, but what you got was like the nuclear bomb version of that. And this is not a good fit. This is not something that should be in the posting. And that works both ways. Sometimes you see the opposite where somebody's asking for a master's degree and whatever, and they want to pay $45,000 annually for this position.
Mhm.
No, that doesn't match.
Yeah.
So
Good luck finding that.
yeah,
That's interesting. So what was the answer? It was just like we copied and pasted the resume of the last
it,
person,
it
or the
was
last person didn't have it. Could be the opposite, like you said.
the actual answer was it was already in the position description. So we just rolled it over from the last time we posted it.
There you go.
So yes, nobody read the prior posting. They just reposted it.
That's how it goes a little bit.
So all those pressures combined and just make it what it is.
There's this like log jam, right? So it's like the pressures combining are like
Yeah.
so the labor market and the particular market that the company is in, and whether they feel like they're in the driver's seat or not. All this technology driving with potential for efficiency, but then sometimes you kind of want to be clear about what you want to be more efficient about, right? And sometimes I guess what I'm hearing in the talent acquisition kind of space, it's just driving to this zero sum game where ultimately you need to escape it entirely through a whole new skills assessment or okay, this person I know can vouch for this person, and those are like the
Mhm.
two outcome paths. I
Pretty
love that
much.
summary. What was that, Michael?
So yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so I guess my takeaway is there it is like AI is coming in big time into the recruiting and sourcing workflows,
Mhm.
but to what end is the question, right? Where is that all headed? So then if you go back to the broadly last kind of area to explore is the small HR team from the recruiting all the way to onboarding, the full life cycle of what it is that you need to do. So, what advice do you have about the small team trying to make smart choices about process, about AI, and also just about how they allocate their time? If you were to put it all together for one of your peers who's struggling through this.
Sure. I would say use AI where AI is valuable. So AI can do small tasks very well. So for example, AI is phenomenal. LLMs specifically are phenomenal at creating position descriptions. They can help you with your compensation analyses. You got to double check them, but they'll give you a great starting point. Yes. It's just,
I hallucinate an X or zero, right? Yeah, be careful.
yeah. Sometimes it's not even that. It's the same as if you can Google what the average salary for something is. Here's the way I think of it. AI is very good at memorizing specifications and specific information. It knows numbers and letters very well. Whereas human memory is very good at contextualizing. It remembers the context of something. So whereas I could type into my AI search agent, what is the average salary for an accountant in Tampa, Florida, or whatever, it will give me that information and it'll be roughly accurate. It's probably not quite accurate, but what it doesn't do, because it knows those numbers, that's what it remembers. It knows how to find those numbers. It's got the whole internet as its memory. It can get that very specific number to me. But what it can't do is understand the context of what it means to live in Tampa Bay. And yes, the average salary in Tampa might be this, but most people who live outside of that specific zip code don't make that amount because they live in the suburbs and the cost of living is far lower than it is in the city. It can't factor that in because it doesn't think contextually. So now I don't know the specific number, but I know the context. And so I can look at that number and go, that's probably too high because, the suburbs, and I know what people make down the street, and I've got peers and friends that I know roughly what they're making. So I think as far as advice goes to smaller HR teams, I would say absolutely embrace AI because it's coming either way. You're stuck with it one way or another. Learn it now, learn it while it's still in its infancy, because it will be that much easier to learn later. Remember what it was like learning how to type the first time you had to learn Word and you didn't take typing in school, and then you're two fingering it, but now everybody types pretty well. So learn it now, start experimenting with it, understand that it makes mistakes, it hallucinates, you have to double check it, it's double work sometimes, but automate the things it can do very well, which is position descriptions. It can give you good starting places for something. And I think a lot of mistakes, specifically most HR people make, is they see it as just an advanced search engine, but that's not the right way to think about it, especially LLMs. The way to think about it is this is an assistant. What I often will tell people offline is AI is like a terrible intern right now. They can do some things pretty well. They can go and get your coffee and do that sort of thing. And they understand the basics of the job. So you can give them small tasks, but if you give them anything that takes a higher level of strategy or contextual thinking, they're not going to do great, but they can learn. So you can ask them, think of them as a helper, as an assistant. Think of AI as an agent to help you. Never accept the first answer. Keep asking for more because it will go deeper. It will dig deeper. It will provide better answers. Study prompting. There's great free resources out there. Google has an excellent one called Grow with Google, and it'll teach you all about AIs and LLMs, nice little easy to digest snippets. There's lots of ways to learn. You can just Google how to get better with AI and you'll find plenty of resources. There's lots of emails that you can subscribe to, podcasts you can listen to, et cetera. So yeah, dive in. That's my advice.
And so we'll definitely get a link to that in the show notes. The last area we just wanted to get into, because we'd hinted at this, but I really wanted to get your thoughts, is looking well ahead into the future. So we're talking about its infancy. We're talking about maybe it'll always feel like it's not quite good enough, but let's look ahead like 5 to 10 years. And you mentioned how HR, legal, finance, like back office or the G&A side, overhead, if you want to use that word, is going to be, it's going to be impacted in a significant way with this technology. So what do you think the HR profession or an HR team looks like in 5 to 10 years? What are the titles, or like, what are they doing? How is it different?
So interesting. I could speculate, but I honestly don't know, and I probably can't fathom. I think about the record player, right? The gramophone. It was invented in, I don't know, 1800 or something like that, a long time ago. And until 1947 or something, it pretty much was the same. 150 years, it looked the same. It was just the record on the plate with the big speaker. And somewhere around 1947, somebody invented something completely different, the 8-track cassette tape. And all of a sudden, there was this other form factor that delivered music in a way that was better and just in a completely different way. Now, for 150 years, you had basically one thing. And then in 1950 or whatever it was, the 8-track comes out. And then maybe 10 years later, 1960 or 70, like you get a cassette player. And then 5 years after that, you get the higher type of cassette, the HD cassette. I forget what they used to call them, the metal cassettes. And then a couple of years later, you get a CD. And then all of a sudden, things start iterating really fast. You go from CD to a mini disc to WAV files to MP3s. And now we have streaming. And it just all of a sudden, the compression of the technological jumps just became greater and greater. And it's the same. You could take any product, a car or computer, and it's the same thing. For many years after they were first invented, they looked the same. But now things are moving so fast. I would hesitate to even guess what HR or accounting would look like in 5 or 10 years. Accounting, by the way, is a great example. My wife is a CPA and an accountant, and all the way back when the mid-century accountants, Middle Ages accountants, they were panicked when the abacus came out. Our jobs are going to go away. Now people could just do it for themselves. And of course, it didn't happen. Accounting evolves, right? It became more complex. And then the same thing happened when Microsoft Excel came out, right? Oh my God, this is the end of accounting. Now people can do all the formulas that we hold sacred and we no longer need our ticker tapes. What are we going to do? It evolved. And now there's AI that can do accounting. And I'm sure accounting will evolve. And it's the same with HR. It's the same with legal compliance. I love the fantasy of an AI that knows legal compliance across the entire world. And I can just go to my legal assistant AI and say, hey, what are the rules around paid time off in Wyoming or whatever? And they could spit it out to me and perfectly easy to understand language. And I could do that. And that may happen. But by that time, the legal landscape will have changed and lawyers will be doing something we would have never imagined that they're doing today. So who knows?
Great point. So then with the gramophone or just music, right? And if you think about an HR org, like where are we in the timeline? Are we like in 1850 or like 1990 or like what does it feel like?
So I think that once we got to, I don't know what year specifically, but somewhere around 2000, 2010, probably, it just stayed that way. So right now, what we have coming on is quantum computing, right? And quantum computing, if people don't wrap their heads around, that's a whole different game. And when you can combine quantum computing with AI, all of a sudden you have capabilities that were never before imagined. You have access to sciences that were never dreamed of before. It can compute answers to questions that we didn't even know we wanted to ask. It becomes the joke of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where technology, society becomes so advanced and they ask this machine, what's the answer to life, God, and everything? And it works for 1,000,000 years to compute the answer. By the time it spits out the answer, 42, nobody remembers what the question was. But in this case, they'll be able to spit out the answer and we'll have just asked the question. It's going into really weird times. I have no idea what the future holds. It's exciting, it's terrifying, and who knows? We're going to find out together.
Yeah,
It'll
let's
be
all
very
dive in and
interesting.
find out together. Before I let you go, Mike, I wanted to get into the lightning round where we're going to do a few questions, 30 seconds or less,
Okay.
off the cuff. First of all, do you have a piece of career advice you've ever received that has stuck with you that you would like to share?
Yeah. Don't follow your passion. Everybody says follow your passion. Somebody once told me the people who have really succeeded are people who didn't follow their passion, but they just got good at something and did it over and over. I used to work for a guy that's the owner of Verizon, Jeff Russell, fantastic guy. Started off as a chicken farmer scooping poop out of trucks and became a multimillionaire because he just got good at understanding cell phones and how to sell them. And just did it over and over. Don't follow your passion. Just find something you enjoy doing and keep doing it.
Okay, so there's a nuance there. And then, are you a morning person or a night owl?
You can probably see it's fairly out of view. There's a sticker back there that says "Night Owl at Work." I'm a Western
Oh,
Governors University grad, and their mascot is the owl. So Night Owl.
there you go. Okay. So, what is one part of HR that you wish we could automate away like tomorrow?
Oh, that would be talent acquisition. Just figure out how to make it work well for everybody and let's move on. Get the right people in the right seat on the right bus at the right time, go in the right direction. Done.
Oh man, matchmaking. I don't know if that'll ever get
That's right.
to be that way. I don't know. It's gonna be tough. But what is your favorite way to stay updated on what's going on in the world of HR or even more broadly, just professionally across the board for development?
Sure. I'm a podcast junkie myself, and there are a few podcasts that I love to listen to. Probably my favorite is Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. It's very tech centric. I get a lot of my tech news there. And it also teaches critical thinking skills as well. And it's one of the few podcasts I pay for every year. I donate to them. And I also love actually get a lot of HR information from non-HR podcasts. So I subscribe to some employment law podcasts, like Employment Law Now is another good one. And I find that it always has relevant legal complexities broken down into very digestible pieces. And yeah, those are a couple. I subscribe to 30 podcasts, but those two come to mind.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for the conversation. So I think that's about all the time we have, but so many insights in this wide ranging conversation about talent acquisition, HR, and the future of the function, especially for small HR teams, which has a unique cross to bear, I think. In these times, Michael, you have sidestepped predicting the future, but made a very compelling case for why you did that, which I appreciate. And I think listeners will as well. But so huge thank you once again for joining us and to talk about where all of this is potentially headed and the kind of insights that you have from your own experience and what you across your peers. These are the conversations that help us all move forward into creating better, more future-proof organizations, which is what this podcast is all about. Thank you, Michael, and to everyone out there. Until next time. Keep building
Yeah.
these amazing organizations and future proof yourselves. Hey, it's Thomas again. One quick question before you go. Are you and your HR team tired of answering the same employee questions again and again in Slack? If yes, our Cleary AI powered Slack bot is here to help. It takes routine employee requests and answers it automatically while freeing up time for you to take on more important tasks. At the same time, it automatically builds up an HR knowledge base as you go. It's quick to set up, works right in Slack, and you can try it for free. Just head on over to gocleary.com/HR-chatbot to install it. It's again, gocleary.com/HR-chatbot. Thanks again.